Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. In a famous and much quoted judicial decision from 1604, English judge and jurist Sir Edward Coke declared that the house of everyone is to him as his castle and fortress, as well as defence against injury and violence, as for his repose. Whilst in 1604, Sir Edward was talking about strict limits on how sheriffs may enter a person's house in order to issue writs, perhaps it could also be a metaphor for how homes of the future may become a fortress against other invaders, infection for one. Of course, there are many trends and drivers that influence how our homes and our home lives might change. But given the additional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on those trends, what might the future home look like by the end of the 2020s? To discuss the future homes through the 2020s, I'm delighted to welcome back futurist at Partners in Foresight, Alex Whittington, to the podcast. Alex, welcome back. Remind us a little bit about you and your background.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me back. I'm Alex Whittington. Like you said, I'm from Houston, Texas, and I am a futurist. And I specialize in something that I call strategic social foresight, which just means I'm very interested in the future of people, right? Shopping, education, families, schools, communities, all the things around how we live. And so I do research consulting, speaking, and I come up with wild ideas such as the ones that I have put in a new report called The Home of the 2020s.
And we'll be talking a bit about that report as we go through this podcast. But let me start with this. What are the critical triggers, do you think, for the assertion that future homes will be different to the homes we've become used to? What is it that's triggered this change in how we might think about homes in the future?
Well, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head in the intro when you mentioned the pandemic. I think that it was a huge tipping point for a number of things in society, but primarily the home, because we spent so much time in the home during the pandemic. It was probably one of the few times in human history that we had this order, let's say, to stay home, not interact with other people, to socially distance. And that kept us more in our private spaces, whether it's a home, a room, wherever you might live, right? An apartment, just different home settings became a little bit more primary to us. So I think that the pandemic is a major reason. It's a major reason I became interested in the future of the home as I saw different things happening, different potentials. I think that the pandemic, along with some other technological changes that have been happening for some time, working from home, learning from home, doing whatever you want from home, really, with the information tools that we have. So I feel like in the future, the home is a really critical location to understand how people will change and evolve.
And you alluded to it there, but in the current situation, I guess it's quite straightforward to see how working and learning at home through lockdowns has become a significant trend, and how it alone might change our perspectives on what home is for. But what are the other underlying social, economic, sustainability, technological drivers that might have changed how we thought about home in any case?
Well, one thing that I have been interested in lately is the rise of the social influencer. These sort of young people who make TikTok videos and they have a persona online, a digital persona where they have thousands, millions of followers, and this is sort of their job, right? This is how they make money. And in many cases, it's also the way that they secure a place to live, because a rather recent trend known as the content house or collab houses or these influencer houses, sometimes they're called TikTok houses, where these influencers can live together under one roof. It's sort of like, the real world. Remember that from MTV, the reality show, The Real World, which has now, given birth to millions of other reality shows like Big Brother with people all living together. But I guess what interests me about the convergence of the housing trend, which is veering towards housing shortage, perhaps, maybe scarcity, not just in the housing itself, but in the ability for young people to afford housing, with the potential to have a career as a social influencer. So there are brands, there are companies, there are media productions that put these houses together, invite people to live there. And basically, they're being supported financially to live in this house and create viral content. So I'm curious about, that sort of shift in the way that we live, because as we know, the future of work is going to be quite different from the past. Not just automation, not just post COVID changes. It's a variety of factors: technology, communications, demographics are all sort of changing the future landscape of work. And I think that young people could be seeking other ways to meet their basic needs, like housing. So it's possible that brands, companies might be stepping up and saying, okay, here's your housing. Now you work for us, right? In that house. As long as you live there, you're producing content for us, or you're doing influencer stuff for us, or maybe you just work for us and create viral content for the company. So I think that there's a lot of potential because content has become a very valuable
Hmm.
product, right? Very valuable. And it's all about unique human lives being able to fulfill and create that content. So I think that's one of the changes that's sort of on the fringe, but I think it's changing the way we look at houses. It's not necessarily an investment, it may actually be a strategy for our subsistence.
It sounds that that's kind of a combination of some of the economic and social trends. And affordability is really quite an interesting one, isn't it? If we do look at the potential for technology, for example, to automate many jobs out of existence or many traditional jobs, then are you really saying there that perhaps what we might see in the future is affordability being out of reach of young people, and this would be a way to still allow young people to have somewhere to live?
Exactly, because the job security, the wealth, the capital may not be there for future generations like it was for baby boomers, for example, even for my
Mm.
generation, Gen X. And the jobs, may not be there. Automation or different productivity gains in our economy that are making some jobs just non-existent. So I think that, yeah, it's possible that if you want to live somewhere, you might obtain that ambition by being able to produce really good viral content.
We touched already a couple of times on technology, and we've spoken about that fairly broadly, I suppose. But what do you see as the major technological advances that will change the nature of the home, change how we use the home, how we live there?
Well, one of the things I've been really fascinated by for a while is a technology called brain computer interface, BCI. It's also known as neurotech, right? Neurological technology. And Elon Musk has a company called Neurotech or Neuralink, excuse me, that does a brain chip implant that was originally designed and meant for, and still is intended for, helping people with spinal cord injuries, things like that, right? To revive the communication in the nervous system. However, there are some applications of this, or even external devices that basically allow people to hack their brains. And within the home, I think the home is going to be probably the most comfortable environment for people who want to hack their brains for non-medical purposes. And so I talk about some scenarios in this Home of the 2020s report of what it might look like if we widely embrace brain computer interface technology, which is essentially, like I said, implanted or even external. It can be something as simple as earbuds. There's earbuds already on the market that you would wear that can actually detect subtle movements in the face that could let a health professional know that you're struggling with anxiety, for example. So it's all about using technology to improve our mental state, increase our productivity, become more focused, maybe become more positive, perhaps overcome different mental health or even cognitive challenges, improve your memory, or just sort of offload part of our cognitive load, right? Offload part of our cognitive burden to external devices that are in our home. So rather than me having to remember the groceries that I need to buy this week, my, smart refrigerator or my personal assistant, digital assistant in my home is able to quickly put together a list for me of everything that we're out of, right, that we've thrown away in the last week or what have you, by detecting the stuff in my home and my patterns and my way of life. So I think that as we embrace this different and very advanced technology that can actually tap into our thinking. It's going to change the way we behave mainly in our home. It may be to get our work done, right? It might be to make us more productive at our work from home jobs. Maybe it would be to help us advance in our career through courses and learning. You could even use it with older people in the home who need remembering stuff or getting around. So I think it has a bunch of positives. Of course, it has a ton of negatives as well, right? There's tremendous privacy concerns. I mean, do you want your Alexa to know every single thing eaten this week and remind you, whether that was a good or a bad idea, if you should eat it again, uh, you know, things like that. We're talking about everything from your kitchen to your bathroom, right? And that's a lot of information about a human being. So where does it go? Who does what with that information after it's served its purpose in your home? That's the big question.
And I guess some of the things that you were talking to there alluded towards this sort of kind of technology supported communications both inside and outside the home, but also controlling things inside the home, be they devices, be they, I don't know, as simple as turning a light on and off through to locking the door.
Exactly. There's that security sense. There's a very fine line. I think you've heard me talk about this before, between big brother and big mother,
Yes.
right? Big brother is scary and wants to control you and spies on you. Big mother is helping you remember things you need to do, taking care of you, ensuring that you're safe and sound. And I think that uncertainty is something we're riding into the future, into the 2020s on. And it's going to take a while to figure out which way it goes.
If we kind of back up a bit from, if you like, a finished house, what are the kind of technological implications for how we design and build houses in the future, homes in the future? What kind of role do you see technology playing there potentially?
One of the more interesting roles I think it can play is to replicate natural materials. There's been a lot of work around like 3D printed wood, 3D printed everything, right? Making artificial, environmentally friendly structures, housing, furnishings, all of it, right? We have a major problem with our consumables being not
Mm.
good for the planet, right? Too many things being thrown away, not being reused. So I think technology can help us reuse the stuff that we already have, right? Figure out ways to, the secondhand market is booming,
Yeah.
right? So even IKEA building materials out of I don't even know what, various sustainable things, coffee grinds, being used in bricks and different forms of concrete that are all more sustainable. So I think that the technology that can help us do two things, build more selling secondhand furniture now in one of their stores. I think they have a pilot project where they're selling used IKEA furniture that people trade in to trade up, right? So I think technology can help us in that way by creating the data, the networks, whatever we need to be apps to be able to upcycle our stuff or find it another good home, right? Quit wasting so much stuff, but also create new products that are environmentally friendly and also psychologically pleasing, because you can have, say, an indoor garden, right? Hydroponic fruits and vegetables that you grow, and all of that stuff, all that greenery, living things, that actually tends to bring a lot of peace and tranquility into a home. And psychologists and all sorts of scientific experiments are now showing how being around nature and having
Mm.
nature in your home is very uplifting. And I think it's very needed at this post-pandemic time, right? For people to have a home environment that supports their mental state and allows them to feel like they're connected to other living things. So the technology to grow vegetables in your apartment, with low or no water or light, the technology to create fabrics and materials that imitate natural fabrics and materials. There was a really interesting interview I did for the study with an architect who specializes in biophilic design, which is all about biophilia, the love of nature, design that loves and sort of gratifies nature, or gratifies our need to be around nature. And he talked about how there's something called fractal fluency, that all of us as human beings are kind of pre-programmed to identify these mathematical fractals that occur in nature. And he described it as like the flickering flames of a fireplace, the waves on the beach, right? The way that leaves move through the wind. These are all like triggers to something very primal inside of us that calms us down. It literally calms your mind. It makes you feel more peaceful, more at ease. So the use of those sorts of elements in design. I mean, we can't all have a flickering fireplace, but he talked to me about a new design of carpet that's created through, highly advanced imaging that replicates what the forest floor looks like, right? The leaves sort of scattered. It's not perfectly geometrical, right? It's sort of imbalanced, but there's a pattern there that we can identify. And when we're around stuff like that, it makes us feel better. So I think that that kind of design enabled by technology will be really important in the home.
One of the things I love about what you've said there, I think it reinforces what I hope is a growing sense among people more generally, that technology is actually an enabler to a greater sense of humanity rather than a detractor from our basic humanity.
Exactly. And, one of the things I asked this architect in the interview was, does it matter if it's a 3D printed wood or a 3D printed picture of the leaves on the forest floor? One of the things he talked about was the grain of wood, natural wood being having those fractals. And he said, no, actually, whether it's artificial wood or real wood, it has the same effect. So I think that's kind of promising because, as we know, we can't just keep deforesting the earth so everyone can look at a pretty piece of wood. But if we can create, fake ones that are really good imitations, we can have more of this more equitably spread among society where everyone can have access to really cool design stuff that's typically, kind of expensive.
One of the other things that I'm increasingly interested in is the idea of repurposing property. So, we started talking about what some of the kind of the triggers for change would be. We've kind of drilled down a little bit into the social, the economic, the technological solutions. You've touched very much on the role that those things being sustainable plays. But if we think about property and real estate that already exists, where might we see repurposing, particularly of non-residential buildings for use as homes?
Yeah, I thought about this quite a bit when I was researching the home of the 2020s. And one of the ideas I came up with is repurposing abandoned malls and possibly theaters in the post-COVID era to provide housing for senior citizens. And I think you could do it with almost any group that needs housing. And I know in the United States there are many groups like that. I mean, the homeless, as well as older people, disabled, all sorts of people could use help with housing. And we do have a lot of abandoned real estate, at least here in the U.S., in the form of these shopping malls that were huge in the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, but they've been sort of left abandoned for going on at least a decade now. This has been a trend. COVID has only exacerbated that. So, is it possible that they could be repurposed into senior citizen homes that are, large, spacious, and possibly pandemic proof? One of the assumptions I'm operating on is that this is not our last pandemic. I mean, it's certainly not our first, and we know there are more. But a lot of things that I'm learning indicate that we're going to be experiencing more as a combination of climate change and are encroaching upon nature, where we encounter more unusual novel viruses by encountering different forms of wildlife more often. So could we have pandemic proof senior citizen housing in abandoned malls or other commercial spaces, places where you have, room to walk indoors? You could have kitchens, right? Places where you can cook, these kind of abandoned food court in the mall where they have restaurant spaces and all of that. You could have medical facilities. You could have housing areas where people actually live, common spaces, and, maybe some indoor, outdoor interaction. And I've even thought, could these groups of senior citizens be somewhat nomadic, moving around to different pandemic proof pods? And it would give senior citizens something to do, take care of them, right? We could watch over them. They could be together, not isolated. Take the burden off of the younger generations who are many times left with the care of older relatives,
Yeah.
in case that isn't feasible or doable for them. And I think you could also create opportunities to interact with different generations. You could take them on, you bring young people in to do community service, to clean up, to cook for them, just like you do in normal nursing homes, but maybe make it a little bit more of the part of the community, also able to seal them off if it becomes necessary to protect them from various adverse effects, whether it's climate, pandemic, or whatever.
Fascinating. For a while, I've thought that when we look at kind of the combination of the pandemic with some of the other drivers about the changing nature of work, the changing nature of the way that we shop, the changing nature of the way that retail business comes off of what we think of in the UK as a high street and online, that real estate in urban centres like offices and shops provides a sort of a ready stock of buildings, of places that could support residential use in the future. But I wonder, does something, do you think, need to happen about the way that we often think about housing as being something that's provided by the private sector and the individuals, to something that's much more about provision from the public sector, and therefore what that might mean for the welfare state and taxation?
Yeah, I think that's a huge hurdle in the US. The fear of socialism is
Yes.
so misguided that would, any sort of public housing is immediately suspect. So that's why one of the ideas I've explored is the sort of corporate sponsorship of this form of housing. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but we do have a huge co-living trend that's been, WeWork, the co-working startup
Yeah.
that provides these sort of communal office spaces, is now getting into the communal home spaces. So it may be that we see homes designed differently. In fact, this is one of the trends I talk about in the study. There's a whole group of designers now designing homes, and basically they're living spaces for non-traditional residents. So basically co-living, where you might have individuals or couples or groups of people that live together. So the big chunk of this design work is designing communal kitchens, for example, communal bathrooms, homes that have, lots and lots of bedrooms, and then open living spaces where people share. So that sort of shift, I think, it's not just economic, it's demographic, because
Mm.
marriage is in decline in the West. So is childbearing. This pandemic has done a real number on demographics in a bunch of ways. Birth rates are way, way down in the Western world. In the developing world, birth rates are going back up. A lot of the family planning strides are falling back as a result of the pandemic. So the way that we live is changing, and that could change the structure of housing, what constitutes a home, what you might have called, like dorm room living
Mm.
20 years ago may someday be the norm, where you just have individuals living together. There was a big story recently on the, I can't remember the term for it, but it's like a collective mortgage. I think it was in the British
Right.
newspapers, right? What do they, the co-mortgage or something, where you
Yeah,
buy
something
a
like
home
that,
with
isn't it? Yeah.
multiple people are all together buying one property. So that's, it's not just economics that's driving that. It's the way we live. People don't have necessarily a spouse or a family or a kid or something. So it's a lot of single people figuring out their way, and that changes how we live.
Alex, that's really, really fascinating. And as I said to you a bit earlier on, I've taken a look at the report, and the report that you've produced is just a wonderful, fascinating piece of work. How can people find the report? Where is it?
It is online. It's published online. You can also email me for a PDF version that I can send you. But if you look me up on LinkedIn or on Medium or even on Twitter, I have posted links to it in all those places, or just feel free to email me, foresightpartner@gmail.com.
Well, Alex, it's great to have you back on the podcast again. That was an absolutely wonderful discussion, I thought, on the future of homes through the 2020s. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Do let your friends and colleagues know about the Informing Choices mini pod, and I'll see you on a future episode very soon.